What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 3 and Out YouTube page. I'm John Middlekauff, and we are talking football all day, every day. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends. Let's roll, baby. Okay, let's go a little Middlekauff mailbag. You guys know the drill. Just my Instagram, at John Middlekauff. Instagram DMs wide open. From Troy, question for the pod. From a scouting perspective, what do you think separated a player like Tyreek Hill being so successful in the league versus players like Tavon Austin, just retired, and D'Anthony Thomas? They all felt like they had different level of speed compared to other players, but only Tyreek had this level of success. Is he just that much faster than the other two? Or did the landing spot with Andy Reid play into his success? Well, with D'Anthony Thomas, his build was a lot different than Tyreek. Like, he was just much smaller. Tavon Austin, I don't have his metrics up, but I feel he was a little thicker. I think both those two are good examples of when you think either one, do you think route runner besides just running straight down the field? You know, if you watch the receiver show, Devontae goes over the route tree, and Tyreek clearly can run go routes and post routes as well as any player we've ever seen, not named like Randy Moss, right? But I would say his ability through the middle of the field on slants, on in, like, you know, like a square in, on a quick out, and the level of route running is elite. Like, it's like Marvin Harrison or Devontae, but it's with the speed of all these cats. And then Tyreek, you know, D'Anthony Thomas isn't breaking tackles in the NFL. Tavon, in theory, should have been a little better at that. But this guy's ability with the ball in his hands to break tackles, because the way he's built, so he runs all the routes at Hall of Fame level. He has 10 out of 10 speed. His ball skills are incredible. So you don't have to hit him in the breadbasket. His ball skills are throw in the vicinity. Obviously, his catching radius isn't, you know, Megatron, but it's still pretty big for a smaller player. So great route runner, great speed, elite ball skills, unreal yards after catch, make guys miss, breakthrough arm tackles. I just think he's a complete player, and those other guys aren't complete players. And the other thing, I can't speak on these other two guys' level, but just knowing, Andy told me this one time, Tyreek's a genius at football. You tell him one thing, and he doesn't forget. So his ability to take the classroom to the field is just at a really high level. So he has all the tangible skills, and then he has the mental skills from a football IQ standpoint. There's just no stopping a player like that. And he needs to dominate, because I already has 12 kids, so he needs the cash, because be an expensive endeavor. I think he's got his current girlfriend's pregnant right now. Maybe his 12th's on the way. But I just think he's in my opinion, he's one of the best players I've ever seen. Any position. So we can argue whether he should be the number one overall player in the top 100. Obviously, quarterbacks are more important, but just pound for pound, if position didn't matter, if they were all equal, if it's like the NBA, positionless sport, you would say he's as good as any. He's as good as any. And his dominance these last couple of years, I mean, can you imagine the Dolphins if they weren't able to trade for him? So I think it has to do he's just a complete player who has elite skills, which really has separated him. The NFL is generally quick to make significant rule changes that impact the game. Some examples: moving the extra point back, now the new kickoff rule. If you have a crystal ball, what do you see being a new rule change in the next 5 to 10 years? Could you see fumbling out of the end zone being a touchback for the other team being taken away? Seems like it disincentivized players from reaching for the pylons. I'll be completely honest, that one's never bothered me. Like a lot of things in life, there are risks and there are rewards. And usually the riskier something is, obviously the higher reward that is. I think it works this way, like in the stock market. You can short a stock and it can be very lucrative if you hit, but if you miss, you can get yourself in trouble. You can take a margin loan. You better hope everything goes your way, right? I know a lot of people over the years have taken these HELOCs, right? These loans from the equity in your home. Better hope everything's going well because that can backfire on you quick, right? Fumbles are random, I would say. No one is ever trying to fumble. But when you reach for the pylon, it's an incredible reward if you make it and get a touchdown. But if you don't, like that one, I am not on the side of people freaking out. I'm just not, because I think that there should be a massive penalty if you fumble that bad boy through the end zone. Now, if you fumble it and it bounces, I understand that one, kind of a freaky thing a couple yards out, but most of them happen with guys reaching and it getting hit out of their hands. I think it adds a huge drama element to kind of a goal line play. Hey, John, congrats on the engagement. With football season coming up, how do you balance football and your love life? Does your fiance ever get jealous of football? If so, how do you mitigate that? Uh, I guess the best way to overall sum up what I do and what I've been doing my entire adult life, working in football and then essentially talking about it for the last decade plus, is this was never a passion project for me. You know, a lot of people, for example, have podcasts now and they work a regular job. And more props to you. Like, that wasn't even an option 10 years ago. So it's cool that exists. But I've never had a regular job. That was never an option for me. So I'm obviously passionate about football and like this, but this is how I pay the bills. And I think this not being ever being a passion project for me, this being my life, it took a while, but like this is pretty lucrative for me and her and our lives. So like I think part of it is what comes with it. Obviously the credibility of being with Colin, who she sees on television and has met. So it's just, she just kind of gets it. I mean, this is what you're marrying into. This is my life. And she likes football. She's a big 49er fan, so that probably helps. I think golf drives her a lot crazier than football, which are the two things that I watch the most. Just because it's always on. She doesn't understand why there's just a golf tournament every week. I'm like, well, it's just a year-long season. They just play all the time. And I tried to explain to her about the majors being like Super Bowls, but she's like, why would there be 4 Super Bowls? Or football is a lot easier to consume. Now, we don't lead the craziest life. It's not like instead of, Thursday night football, I got to watch. It's not like we'd be, maybe if we were going to go to dinner, maybe instead we go Friday night or Wednesday night, I guess. But you just balance. I don't know. It's like, it's really like any job, but there are benefits, right? As of right now, we don't have any kids, so I haven't needed to get an office outside of the house for my own sanity. Because I'm gonna need to eventually. But she's in real estate, so we see each other all the time. We work in the same spot essentially. So it's really not that complicated. And if someone didn't understand, I guess the way my life is, because it's different than more of a normal job, in the sense of like, Sunday's a work day, but Sundays are a work day for a lot of people. There's a lot of people that own businesses that work 7 days a week. And when I was a kid, my dad was a farmer. My friends' grandparents owned a construction company, and I worked on the ranch and I worked on construction. Like, that's hard work. Like, I think I'm very lucky that this worked out the way it did. And yeah, I've benefited from sticking with it. But I don't even think you need to. I'm not a huge balance guy. I'm just a live life guy. Now, obviously, once you get engaged or married, or anyone listening to this in relationships, no, it takes effort, and you have to. One thing I've learned is just because we both work from home and see each other all the time doesn't necessarily mean it's quality time. Like I see 24/7, 365. Besides like when we go to the gym or I play golf or you go do something. But obviously you just grow as a human being. It's not very difficult. That's what I would say, which is probably why I'm marrying her, because this is my life and it's not going to change. And yeah, she likes it. Throw another shrimp on the Barbie. Get on all the UFC 305 action live from the land down under at DraftKings Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of the UFC. The middleweight title's on the line for the main event, but the card is stacked full of rip snorter blokes and shellas. And speaking of stacked, if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers get $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use the code JOHN. That's code JOHN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. UFC 305. It's going to be a ripper of a good time. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Longtime listener. Great to see your success. I know you're not big on discussing the Raiders. People think I'm such a Raider hater. I'm not. If they were good, I'd be the first to acknowledge it. They just haven't been good for all of my adult life. And I'm 40 or 39, about to be 40 in a couple months. But it's not. One thing I think Raiders fans, which is crazy to me, drives me nuts. They always think like, you just hate us. Like all the bad teams get talked about negatively. And when you're bad, it's usually not sunshine and rainbows. Just like on the flip side, when you're good, people acknowledge it. And you've just always been bad for a long period, since the internet era, basically. You've been terrible and just been irrelevant. And that's your problem. It's not me. It's not a me problem. It's a franchise problem. It's not your fault. Like, you're just a fan, but the national media seems to downplay the Raiders' potential this year, with many predicting fewer than 6 wins. However, beat writers close to the team believe they could be a sleeper playoff contender. Know this, if you are a beat writer, you spend a lot of time around the team. So obviously, two things. One, sometimes you can have a jaded view of the operation. And two, you kind of are dependent on the team in the sense of, like, you need those sources in that operation. Like, that's your job. That's your livelihood. So it is a tough balance to do. They have good players. I mean, Max Crosby and Devontae are stars. Colton Miller, who I think has been banged up this preseason, is a really, really good player. They have now they drafted Tyree Wilson last year, who might be awful. They signed Wilkins, stud. But Gardner Minshew's your quarterback, and everyone says, like, how are you just discounting the Raiders? He almost helped the Colts. Well, one, the Colts division last year was a lot easier than this. Two, the Colts head coach was also their play caller, who many around the league, myself included, and most fans with a brain go, yeah, this guy's probably a star. Your coach is a guy who, was playing not that long ago, who's an impressive leader, has nothing to do with the offense. Nothing. So it's not like your head coach can impact the quarterback beside rah-rah speeches, which he's clearly good at. Like, I'm not trying to diminish. Like, Antonio Pierce is an impressive leader. Do I think he's going to be a great head coach? I think it's impossible when you quarterback situation is what it is. So this is a long question, but obviously Josh was a complete failure, which I thought was the right move. And I'll give Mark Davis a lot of credit. Is unlike Dean Spanos that had to get so embarrassed and Harbaugh fell into his lap in the sense of, like, he was ready to leave and it was easy. Now, ultimately, he landed him, so you get credit. Mark Davis has been swinging after big fish for a while. He gave John Gruden $100 million. Didn't work out, but you get credit for trying. If the Chargers would have been aggressive with some of these coaches over the years, maybe they wouldn't have found themselves in this situation. Josh, second time's a charm. Turns out, no. He's just not meant to be a head coach, clearly. So what is the national media and podcasters like yourself missing? To me, it's just not very complicated. The quarterback situation. And I think your coaching situation is a major, major question mark of just how that guy can impact the quarterback position. If you tell me you got Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew, the combination of those guys, whoever ends up winning the job, however that ebbs and flows throughout the season, I'm not going to bet on you. I'm just not. Unless your defense had Lawrence Taylor, Max Crosby, Deion Sanders, Ray Lewis, I'd be like, well, maybe they can just win 9-10 games on defense alone. Because the quarterback position is so emphasized in this modern day game. So I think it's just that. If you told me you had Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix, I'd be like, yeah, they could make a wild card for sure. I would say that. But when that's your quarterback room, it's just impossible to say that. It really is. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not possible, but I think anyone predicting them to be a wild card contender, I think just it feels extreme to me. It does with who you got behind center. Question for the bag. I know there's always talks and comparisons between Mahomes and Tom Brady. As Mahomes continues to win and stack up the accolades, but if the Chiefs are to realistically win it all this season and complete a three-peat, how close do you believe he really is to Tom? Mahomes would have 4 Super Bowls in 7 seasons as a starter, along with 4 Super Bowl MVPs and 2 regular season MVPs. I think Tom's trump card, that number 7 is so big. It's like it's really hard to chase Jordan when he's got the 6. Curry's got the 4. LeBron's got the 3.5. I give the bubble a 0.5er. But like ultimately, if my number's bigger than yours, it's and dramatically, but you win 3 in a row, it would be the greatest accomplishment in the history of the league for Andy and Mahomes, because it's never been done. It's never been done. Just like Tom would say, no one has. Name me a quarterback who has 6 Super Bowls, let alone 7. Montana was widely considered the GOAT forever because he had 4. I mean, we consider Elway and Manning and these guys like top 5 quarterbacks, and they got 2. Obviously, it's a team game, and you're very dependent as a quarterback on your coach / play caller and your general manager of building a good team. And he's benefited greatly from that. But obviously, so did Tom with Bill. So I think the hard thing ever to do is like equate mid-career to another guy. I mean, we do that with just great players. Like, is this the greatest player we've ever seen? Listen, I'm a big golf guy. People say that about Tiger Woods. Because of Tiger Woods' body, he's never going to have more majors than Jack Nicklaus. It's never going to happen. Just like LeBron James. At 40 years old, it feels impossible for him ever to get to 6 championships. Especially with the Lakers roster, where he's going to be for the next couple of years. Even if he plays 5 more seasons, which is possible. So it's just, you can argue careers, you can argue moments, but I mean, the goal of every season is to win the title. And I think the best, if Mahomes doesn't get to the number, which feels pretty crazy to even have a chance, but if he can go to like, losing Super Bowls is also a positive. Like Peyton Manning getting the 2, but he got to 4. But that's the thing with Rodgers. Like, he's got the 1. If Rodgers has been to 2 other Super Bowls and lost, that would be an addition to his legacy. Part of it is like he's never been past a championship game since that moment. Even Favre. Like, Favre got to 2 Super Bowls. Elway, I think, got to 5. Now, it's a reflection of the entire operation, but obviously as the lead dog, you're the one that gets the most credit for that. Similar question. Do you think Mahomes has to get 7 rings to become the GOAT? End of the day, GOAT conversations, there's nothing more subjective than that. There really isn't. Like, Mahomes is the best player in the league. That's objective. Wins the most accomplished, best eye test, statistically, like, it's just not even debatable. He's unfazed in the playoffs. But, like, we can argue till we're blue in the face, GOATs, different sports. What does that even mean? I talk for a living. I don't know. If I was a GM, think about this. If I was a GM and you could get any player in the history of the league at 22, 23 years old, and you had the number 1 overall pick, are we 100% sure Tom Brady would be the number 1 overall pick? What if you took John Elway? What if you're like, I'm such a good GM, I'll take Peyton Manning. I'll take Mahomes. I'll take Favre. I'm just saying you could make, these are all just arguments. That's all this is. So I think Tom, he's obviously pretty far ahead. Mahomes, he wins the third. I mean, that would add a pretty big curveball to the conversation, though.
What's going on? I was just about to podcast. But you know what I usually do before I podcast? My friends at viahemp.com sent me these THC-free Flow State Focus gummies. I've been taking one every day the last couple weeks before I podcast, and I gotta say, I think my podcasts have been pretty fire. Now, I do like a little THC, especially at night. I've already used one of these. This is my second batch. The Dreams one. It's got 5 milligrams of THC. It's got 90 milligrams of CBD. Cannot recommend this one enough. And here's the thing with Via. You can go to 0 to 100 milligrams, so you can control what you're comfortable with. The balance between CBD and THC. If you like no THC, they have a lot of THC products that, like I said, cannot recommend them enough. So here's what I need you to do. If you're 21 or over, go to the link below in the description. Use the promo code JOHN, that's my name, promo code John, for 15% off. And when you check out, make sure you let them know who sent you, 3 and Out Podcast. So prioritize your recovery, enhance your everyday life, like I have, with Via.
If CJ Stroud is a top 3 MVP candidate and Bryce Young has another below average season, would you say that the Panthers had the biggest whiff of all time with their number 1 overall pick? No. I mean, there have been bigger whiffs in NFL history, right? The other thing is you can't do a whiff because the biggest whiff of all time would probably be like Jamarcus Russell. Didn't it go Jamarcus Russell, Calvin Johnson? Jamarcus Russell was out of the league in 3 years. Out of the league. So I think it's hard to do that 2 years into a career. You could say it's 100% a mistake. There's no debating it. But it's like, let's use the Trevor Lawrence draft. Okay, Trevor still goes 1. What quarterback would be the second off the board? It wouldn't be Zach Wilson. It wouldn't be Trey Lance. It wouldn't be Mac Jones, but it wouldn't be Fields. Like, are any of those quarterbacks getting drafted in the first round? I think the answer is 100% no. So I think the question would be, is if in 5 years, CJ is just a bona fide top 6, 7 quarterback in the league every single year, and Bryce is on another team, then it's just a catastrophic mistake. Especially if David Tepper's wife loves CJ Stroud. And listen, part of being a GM and a head coach, there's got to be luck involved. The Chargers had Tua above Herbert on their draft board. That's not an opinion. That's a well-documented fact because Telesco's boys with literally every single media person except myself. Tells them all. And rightfully so. I mean, that wasn't a crazy thing to have 4 years ago or whatever. But Tua goes first and they just take Herbert. Promise you this, they don't regret that one. But sometimes you don't know. So I made a bet with a coworker that the Cowboys wouldn't win a playoff game this season. We're both Cowboy fans. He's a lot younger than me. And under some delusional mind that the Cowboys are great, he wasn't even born when they won 4 Super Bowls in a row if we had Jimmy Johnson as a coach. I don't know if he beat the Niners in 94. They had a little guy named Primetime. I think the Niners win that game because of Dion. I mean, signing Dion, who then you got and you immediately win. I don't think it changes. Now, maybe you keep winning a little longer, but I think you were losing that one. But I hear what you're saying. What do you think my odds are to win this bet? I'd say 50-50. I think the Cowboys are going to be a playoff team. And the thing with the playoffs, and it's easy to crush people, Dak sucks. It's not inconceivable. If they're healthy and they're depending on the matchups, they could win a multiple playoff games and be in the NFC Championship game. If you get to the dance, anything's possible. It's just a fact. No one thought the Packers were going to be the Cowboys. Then they boat raced them. Then you're like, oh, Packers are going to get Jordan Love smoked by the Niners. They were kicking their ass. Happens all the time. The playoffs, this is not a 7-game series. It's one game. And if you have a bad half, you might not be able to make up for it. I'll be the first to admit the Niners got very lucky last year in both games, especially the Lions game. They were in major trouble. I've been watching this Pete Rose documentary, and the Cincinnati Reds, the Big Red Machine, were going to the World Series all the time, and or minimum going to the NLCS all the time. Like, oh, we lost a devastating game in Game 4. See you Game 5. We just got Carlton Fisked in Game 6. That sucks. We'll just win Game 7 and win the World Series. So football's weird that way. Now, I think the best thing you have going for you is there is a chance your team's pretty top heavy if the Cowboys don't make the playoffs. Let's say they go 9-8 and they aren't one of the top 7 seeds, then you win. But if you make the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, all of a sudden they're in the playoffs, kill the Eagles. Part of it, obviously, they benefited because they won the division, that they had a home game. That if you're a wild card team, you got to go on the road. But I was DMing with a Cowboy fan the other day. Home road does not matter for you. Like, it's not like you have any advantage at home. 2 of the last 3 years, Niners beat you 3 years ago, and the Packers killed you last year. So it's not like must have a home game. I don't think that matters at all. Honestly, your best game of the last 3 years, I'd say, was 2 years ago on the road against the Niners in the second round. Easily could have won that game. Your defense won that game, was playing winning football. Dak screwed you with picks. I'd say make the playoffs. This is more of a request than a question, but can you please confront Colin on his prejudice against Brock Purdy? Colin was rambling on about how Sam Darnold could still be great and hasn't had great situations before. And yet, did Sam beat out the returning from surgery in the first full season as a starter, Brock Purdy? No. Sure hoping the season Brock puts an end to all the holdouts want to disrespect him. I've said this forever. It's not going to end. He could have the same season as last year. Throw a bunch of touchdowns, lead a team to 12, 13 wins, have them winning in the playoffs. Then he'll get a big contract. And everyone would be like, oh, well, now we judge him on a $50 million. Like, now we compare him to Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, which you could argue is fair then. Everything's fair game once you get a huge contract. But there's no one, there wasn't, not that he would have beat out Purdy. And even Sam Darnold admitted, Purdy taught me how to study. But it's not, I promise you this. The Purdy conversation has only just started. It is not slowing down. To me, the only way to shut it up, because he could have won the MVP last year and it wouldn't have stopped. He'd have to have like a 48 touchdown season of just like, what are you going to say? But if he has another one, like 32 touchdowns, like, oh, Kyle, the weapons. Mahomes, last time I checked, when he won his first MVP, he was throwing to Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. Got news for you. They're both going first ballot Hall of Famers. And when it's all said and done, Tyreek Hill is probably a top 3 or 4 wide receiver ever. Travis is going to go down as, even Shannon Sharp admitted this, greatest pass-catching tight end of all time. And he's got Andy Reid. Like, usually these things go hand in hand. Joe Montana, he's throwing to Jerry Rice and John Taylor with Bill Walsh. And great defenses. Tom Brady, great players, great defense. You can't do it by yourself. You got no shot. You mentioned a few podcasts ago the Eagles valued and targeted Russell Wilson in the draft, but missed. Can you share the inside info, the stories about draft night where the team's brass misjudged or missed on a target? What are some of the mind games Howie used to throw teams off the scent? Is there a good tell-all book on draft stories? I'm not in on these conversations with Andy and Howie when I was with the team. So I couldn't pretend to act like what's getting leaked, what's getting said. I do think, though, it boils down to 10, 15 years before and forever previously, the quarterback inflation is not what it is now. So when you saw a quarterback you really liked, like this year's a good example. All these quarterbacks, they ended up going 6 in the top 12. I'd say 15 years ago, some of those guys go in the second round. They're the same player. They just go later in the draft. So you viewed it much more like pure value. Where's this guy going to go? Somewhere between pick 60 and 90. And you try to play it perfectly to spend the least amount of draft capital on the player. Like, it's no different than any transaction. Trying to buy a car, trying to buy a house. If you run a business, trying to acquire another business, what is the least amount I can pay for what I want? And when you do that, sometimes the other person says, no, not going to do that. Not going to negotiate. This is the price. Or when you draft forever, it's like, could I get Russell Wilson in the middle of the third round? Most people thought you could have, because half the league wouldn't even be interested in a player like that. And then obviously John Schneider loved him and took him. But I just think they played the value game. And I think Howie's talked about this. They don't really do that anymore. When they really like a guy, they get aggressive and go get him. They've done it with position players, but they did it with Jalen Hurts. Could maybe they have got Jalen Hurts in the third round? Yeah, maybe. But we liked him. We're all in on him. Let's draft him. So I just think it was a different time. Back then, these quarterbacks, it's hard to even describe. The way you discussed it in the building was nowhere near like the way we do now. And I think a huge reason for that is some of these guys that have hit. Because when you hit on a guy who, Josh Allen historically was never getting drafted in the top 10. He barely could throw for like 55% in college. Now, he had traits and there was a lot to like, and he's a good guy. But that kind of movement changed the sport forever. And we've seen it not work out like 2021. And we've seen it this year where it looks like all these guys are pretty talented. But like Bo Nix in the history of the sport usually goes in the second or third round. Same with like J.J. McCarthy. Wouldn't have been a top 15 pick. That doesn't mean they go on. I mean, I've seen it with Derek Carr's been a starter in the league for like 12, 13 years. He wasn't a first round pick. Jimmy Garoppolo was an excellent prospect coming out. Second round pick. Drew Brees, second round pick. So I think back in the day, you tried to value like, can I use my first round pick on another player and then get this quarterback somewhere else? I mean, hell, the Seahawks, I think, drafted 2 other players before they Bruce Irvin was definitely their first round pick that year. I forget who they took in the second round. Might have been Bobby Wagner. It might have been Bruce Irvin, Bobby Wagner, or Russell Wilson. Well, if you could do it all over again, Russell Wilson would have been where Bruce Irvin but they didn't even know. Partly because small quarterbacks back then, that's the other thing. Smaller quarterbacks up until the last, really, Russell was a big reason it changed, were heavily discriminated against. And then the sport kind of changed. You don't just need to sit in the pocket and play. Example, him. He's not even a great pocket quarterback. He was a scramble runaround guy. And then we've seen since, Kyler Murray, number 1 pick. Tiny. Short, not small. He's thick. Baker, short, number 1 overall pick. Bryce Young, tiny and skinny, number 1 overall pick. I think there's a decent chance Bryce is not as good of an NFL player, obviously, as either one of those two. I keep hearing you reference CEO head coach as a negative. Yet the 2 longest coaches in the NFL right now don't call plays on either side of the ball. Last year's Final Four was 50-50 play callers, 50-50 CEO types. As a president of a large construction company, if I had to do day-to-day task responsibilities equivalent to play calling, I couldn't properly see the needs to the business. I would be too tied down to my daily tasks. I don't. So I have the flexibility to support operations, sales, logistics, HR, finance when needed, with my ultimate obligation being the overall performance of the business. I have a 15,000-foot view of everything, which allows me to be critical about weak points in the business and exploit the strengths. Challenge management coordinators to view things from different perspectives. Own and develop a consistent culture. My guy sounds like he's doing pretty well. I acknowledge that McVay, Shanahan, and Reed are the top 3 head coaches in the NFL, but my point is that the right CEO type can be just as effective in an NFL locker room, and maybe even more so in different situations. Success and failure as a head coach in the NFL isn't based on your ability to call an offense or defense, but how you are able to positively impact the team. You said that calling plays is day-to-day activity. I think we would have to acknowledge the play calling in your example, running a company, would be a major part, right? So in a certain, that'd be like sales, or depending on your business, the product. I would say play calling, especially offensive play calling, is a huge part of the pie chart of everything that encapsulates a business. I've never said I didn't like CEO head coaches. John Harbaugh is legit. I'm a huge Dan Campbell guy. I swear by Jim Harbaugh. Mike Tomlin, I thought it was time in Pittsburgh for a divorce. I said he would immediately be the number 1 candidate on the board. I'm more critical of a guy like Sirianni, where, like, I know what John Harbaugh brings to the table. His leadership is elite. Same with Jim. Their ability to run the organization is top notch. Sirianni is an example. I don't know what he's doing. Robert Saleh, CEO, head coach. I don't get it. I do not get it. No different than all CEOs don't have the same skill set. My buddy Scotty is trying to make it in the finance world down in LA. Caddy's a little on the side at one of the nicest country clubs in Newport Beach. Probably within the last 6 months, I'm on a group text with him, my brother and a couple other people. He said, I just caddied for the CEO of Chipotle. He's like, dude's the man. He's like, listen, I don't pretend to know what makes a Fortune 500 CEO, but I think this guy's got it. What happened 2 days ago? That guy was hired to run Starbucks. So clearly that guy's skill set is pretty freaking high level. But we see CEOs all the time get booted. Hell, Starbucks just ran the guy out of town. Felt a little overwhelmed. So if you are going to do the quote unquote CEO role, one, and I don't know your background, but I would imagine you have expertise in certain elements of your business before you started the company from scratch. Maybe there's a chance you just started from scratch, young entrepreneur, didn't know anything, but I would doubt that. So you have a very good feel for X, Y, and Z. Maybe you've had to really master and learn about over the time in your career running the company, A, B, C, and D, which is no different with a CEO head coach. There are certain things they're very comfortable doing and other things they have to get better at. But we have to acknowledge some people that are quote unquote CEO head coaches. Like, do they know X, Y, Z or A, B, or C? Feels like they what are they doing? That is my point. Like, the guys you listed have elite characteristics. So I get it. I'm cool with hiring them. I was texting someone the other day. If I had the chance to hire a coach, because I do fall under offensive guys, play callers. I understand why that's where you'd want to lean. But if it was January 1st and I was a GM or an owner, I think Mike Vrabel might be my number 1 guy. depending, I mean, it doesn't feel like there's a Shanahan or McVay potentially in this crew. Maybe Kellen Moore becomes that. But I don't think you'd go wrong. You'd feel pretty good. And where does Mike Vrabel fall under? Kind of that group. So I'm not thinking these guys like it's a joke. But certain guys also have that title. And like I said, what are they doing? And what do they bring to the table? What do they bring to the table? Because like you said, you could be a CEO. You were the best sales guy in the company for a decade and a half. Now, you don't know in construction, you're not a carpenter, you know nothing about electricity or electrician work, you don't know plumbing, you know, you're decent with logistics. You would have to learn some stuff on the fly, but like you bring something to the table immediately. Sirianni can't impact the offense. Like, what's Saleh? I don't get it. And I like Robert Saleh, but he was hired because of his defensive expertise. And hell, their defense has been a little overrated the last couple of years. Not gonna lie. But I hear you. I think you pigeonhole me as saying something that I'm not totally against. Should/will the Bengals trade Jamar Chase and T. Higgins? I personally think the owner is cheap. Well, I mean, I think that's pretty well established over the years. And that's why they have not paid either. But is he looking at this team as a whole? And there are some obvious holes, or even looking at the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl with the wide receiver core. How many picks you get? Well, at this point, T. Higgins, he's a franchise tag. The time to trade him would have been 6 months ago or the previous year. So that ship has sailed on trading him for any value. I think the Jamar Chase question is, he's a top 5 wide receiver, clearly. He's an elite player who you used draft capital in the top, what was he, the 5th pick? So that's a very, very valuable piece. Like, ultimately, T. Higgins was an incredible second-round hit. Jamar was a valuable asset in which you had to pay a premium for. And he's hit. I think they'd say we don't pay people after 3 years, beside our quarterback, which we did. I think, what was it, after 4 years? Joe Burrow paid last year? Could be wrong on that. Jamar Chase gets you all. But think of the teams that would be interested in Jamar Chase. The Rams? I bet they in a heartbeat would give you 2 1s and a 2 for him. Well, if you give Jamar Chase to the Rams, I think it's fair to assume that those picks are going to be in the 20s. So what you paid for Jamar and then what you get for him, does that make sense? The Bills, same thing. The Chiefs, like, you're not trading them to the Chiefs or the Bills. The Steelers need a wide receiver. You obviously wouldn't do a deal with him. So I think that's where it gets. Would the Cowboys give you a couple 1s and a 2 for Jamar Chase? Probably not, because they already got CeeDee Lamb, who they're about to pay. I think in a perfect world, you trade to a team that then kind of sucks, but I don't think those teams are interested in making that move. I think that's where it gets really complicated. I think you just end up paying him. He hasn't practiced yet, which clearly, I think Florio wrote today, part of the reason he's holding in and not just completely holding out is because there was a training camp bonus or an off-season bonus that he hits for just showing up. But it doesn't look like they're that inclined to give him money. So it'll be fascinating to watch the way this plays out. But I think if you're all in on your quarterback, and Andy and Veach, and those guys had a little more equity. They'd won a Super Bowl. They'd been to another. They clearly were a massive just problem. They already had a sweet defensive player that they were going to have to invest in. That's like, where are you going to reinvest the capital? I think you should have traded T. Higgins this offseason and used a pick on other players and just invest in Jamar Chase with Joe Burrow. That to me is the solution there.